Welcome to the SmartKeys podcast. I want to start today with a scenario that I think is going to feel painfully familiar to pretty much everyone listening. You're sitting in a kickoff meeting. The energy is high, coffee's fresh, and you are mapping out a massive project. Maybe it's a product launch, maybe it's a kitchen renovation. It really doesn't matter. You look at the timeline, you see the steps, and you think, okay, this is doable. We have a plan. This time, it's going to be smooth sailing.
And then, cut to 3 weeks later, you are wildly over budget, the team is burned out, you're missing deadlines left and right, and you're just asking yourself, how did we get here again?
That is the universal struggle, isn't it?
Right.
We are perpetually convinced that this time will be different. But the data and just history suggests it almost never is. So today we're doing a deep dive into the psychology and the mechanics of why that happens. We're unpacking a really comprehensive resource from smartkeys.org. It's titled The Planning Fallacy, Why We Underestimate Time and How to Plan Better by Felix Römer.
And this is a piece of work that really bridges that gap between academic psychology and the hard reality of the P&L sheet.
Yeah.
And frankly, this matters so much right now because the margin for error in business it's effectively vanished. In a hyper-fast landscape, accuracy isn't just a nice to have. Accuracy beats optimism every single time.
That's a strong statement, especially in a culture that it often celebrates the visionary, the optimist. We love the guy who says, I can build a rocket to Mars in a week.
Yeah.
But you're arguing that when it comes to execution, that optimism it's actually a liability.
When it blinds you to reality, absolutely. We aren't talking about being grumpy or pessimistic. We're talking about budget overruns, missed market windows.
Team burnout.
And team burnout, exactly. When leadership gets the timeline wrong, the team pays the price in late nights, missed family dinners, and just frantic firefighting.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. First, we're going to unpack the neuroscience of why our brains essentially lie to us about time. Then we'll look at the real costs, the dollars and cents, which are kind of staggering. And finally, we're going to walk through the playbook that Felix Römer outlines to actually fix it. We want to move you from guessing and hoping to, real strategic planning.
Exactly. It's about moving from a wish to a plan.
Okay, let's start with the core concept, the planning fallacy. It sounds a bit academic, but define it for us in practical terms. What are we dealing with?
Right. So the term itself, it comes from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
The heavyweights of behavioral economics.
The absolute heavyweights. And in simple terms, the planning fallacy is just this tendency to underestimate the time, costs, and risks of future actions, while at the same time overestimating the benefits. It's a cognitive trap where we see the future through, rose-colored glasses.
It's the eyes bigger than your stomach problem, but for project management.
That's a fair analogy, yeah. But Kahneman and Tversky, they identified a specific mechanism driving this. It's a conflict between two ways of thinking. Case-specific optimism versus base rate reality.
Okay, let's drill down on that. Case-specific optimism versus base rate reality.
Yeah.
I assume case-specific means I'm looking at my project.
Correct. This is what they call the inside view. So let's say you're launching a new software feature. You look at your plan, you see your team, your code, your strategy. It looks logical. You visualize the path from A to B, and in your head, it's just a straight line. You assume that because you have a plan, the plan will work.
Which feels intuitive, right? I know my team is smart. I know I've done the prep work. Why shouldn't I trust my specific plan? It feels like I'm betraying my team if I don't believe in them.
That's the emotional hook. But the universe doesn't really care about your plan. And that's where the outside view comes in. The outside view asks a totally different question. It asks, how long has it taken other teams to launch similar features in the past? That is the base rate. And almost invariably, the base rate is much, much slower than your inside view visualization.
It's interesting because we almost feel like it's cheating to look at other projects. We think, well, they didn't have our tech stack or they weren't as motivated as we are. We think we're special.
Exactly. That is optimism bias at work. Römer uses the student paper example, which is just classic. You ask a student, how long will it take to write this paper? They visualize typing speed and reading speed. They say 3 days.
Right. They do the math. 10 pages, 500 words a page. Simple.
But they don't visualize the writer's block. They don't visualize the printer breaking. They don't visualize getting the flu or their roommate throwing a party. If you ask them, how long did your last paper take? They'd probably say a week. But they ignore that data. They convince themselves that last time was an anomaly. Oh, I was distracted last time. This time I'm focused.
It's motivated reasoning. We rewrite history to justify our current optimism. We treat the past as just a series of unfortunate accidents, and the future as a completely clean slate.
We assume obstacles won't appear, even though obstacles always appear. And that is the fundamental disconnect. We plan for a world that doesn't exist, a world without any friction.
You know, there's also a social pressure element here that the article touches on, which I found fascinating. It's not just that we're deluding ourselves, it's that we're performing for other people.
Oh, this is a huge factor in the corporate world. Huge. Imagine you're in a boardroom. The CEO asks, when can we ship? If you take the outside view and say, well, looking at historical data, this is complex. It could take 6 to 8 weeks. How does that sound?
It sounds weak. It
Yeah.
sounds like you're padding the numbers or you're afraid of hard work. You sound like a wet blanket.
Exactly, a bureaucrat. But the person who jumps up and says, we can crunch, we can sprint and get this done in 3 weeks, they sound like a leader. They sound decisive, ambitious.
So corporate culture actually selects for the planning fallacy.
Hmm.
We reward the people who promise the impossible, even if they fail to deliver it later.
We do. And then we suffer from what's called choice supportive bias. We remember the one time we pulled an all-nighter and miraculously hit the deadline. We treat that as the standard. And we conveniently forget the 5 times we missed the deadline by a month.
So we've got biology working against us, and we've got office politics working against us. That is a toxic combination.
It is, and it's not just about frustration. Let's pivot to the cost. Because I think people often view this as a soft skill issue. Oh, we're a little late, no big deal. But Römer argues this hits the P&L sheet, and it hits it hard.
The article leads with a really staggering example of this. The Elbphilharmonie Concert Hall in Hamburg. I knew this project was a disaster, but I didn't realize the scale of the numbers until I read this piece.
It is the poster child for the planning fallacy. So the original proposal, opening in 2010, budget of 77 million euros.
77 million. Okay, a lot, but for a concert hall, sure.
It finally opened in 2017, 7 years late. And the cost. It ballooned to roughly 789 million euros. That is 10 times the original budget.
10 times. Imagine walking into your CFO's office and saying, hey, remember that 77 million? I'm going to need about 700 million more. You'd be fired on the spot.
And yet this happens constantly, just on smaller scales. The article points out that home renovations, they follow the exact same pattern. The typical budget is around $19,000, but the actual cost usually lands closer to $39,000. We consistently double the cost because we plan for the happy path.
The happy path. I like that term. That's the path where the materials arrive on time and the contractor doesn't get sick.
Right, but we fall off that happy path because of something the source calls white space risk. This was a key insight for me.
Yeah, define that. What is white space risk?
So white space risk refers to the essential items that aren't on your timeline at all. When you look at a Gantt chart or a project plan, you see the bars for design, build, test. Those are the visible tasks. White space risk is all the friction in between those bars.
It's like the dark matter of project management.
Exactly. It's the permit you forgot you needed from the city. It's the 3 weeks it takes for legal to approve a vendor contract. It's the time lost while a new hire waits for IT to set up their login.
It's administrative friction. And you can't put a task on a chart that says, wait for bureaucratic nonsense, so we just pretend it's not going to happen.
But it causes these stop-the-line delays. You can't build until you have the permit. And because that delay wasn't in the plan, the schedule slips immediately. And this triggers what he calls the Eisenhower box problem.
Urgent versus important.
Precisely. When you underestimate time, you force your team into firefighting mode. Everything is late, so everything becomes urgent. Your highly paid, talented engineers or marketers spend their days just fixing immediate crises, what we call urgent low-value work.
Instead of doing the deep, strategic, important work that actually grows the company.
Right. You're just stuck on a hamster wheel. You're pedaling incredibly fast. Everyone is sweating, but the business isn't actually moving forward because you didn't plan for the friction.
So if I'm a manager or even just leading a small team, how do I spot this before it happens? What are the red flags?
You have to listen to the language in the room. The article lists these specific minimizer words. If you hear someone say, this should be a quick win, or it's just a tweak.
Should be hard.
Shouldn't be hard, yes. Or my favorite, it's just a small change to the code.
Famous last words.
Just is the most dangerous word in project management. Those words signal that the person is looking at the surface level. They haven't thought through the dependencies. They are operating on pure optimism. When you hear just, you need to dig deeper.
Okay, so just equals danger. I love that as a rule of thumb. All right, let's pivot to the solution. We know our brains are wired to lie to us. We know the corporate incentives encourage that lie. How do we break the cycle? Felix Römer outlines a playbook here.
He does, and it starts with rejecting the inside view. The very first strategy is something called reference class forecasting.
Which sounds very technical, but break it down for me. How do I actually do this on a Tuesday morning?
It's about changing the question you ask. Instead of asking, how long will this project take, you ask, how long have similar projects taken in the past? You build a reference class of data.
So if I'm launching a website, I don't look at my project plan. I look at the last 5 websites we launched.
Correct. And here is the discipline part. You use that historical data to create a range. This is key. Do not give a single date. If the last 3 updates took anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, your estimate for this one cannot be 2 days just because you feel good about it.
But what if I do have a better team now? What if we have better tools? Isn't it possible to beat the base rate?
It's possible, but it's not probable. And betting on the improbable is gambling, not planning. You can aim for the low end of the range, sure, but if history says 1 month and you plan for 1 week, you are setting yourself up for failure. It's about using data to crush your own ego.
I can see that being a tough sell in a meeting. Hey, boss, I know we want this next week, but history says next month. That takes courage.
It is tough. But that brings us to the second strategy, which helps with that conversation. The unbiased skeptic.
I love this idea, although the article hints it can be socially awkward. You basically invite a designated hater into the room.
Maybe not a hater, but certainly an agnostic. You need to invite a colleague who has absolutely no stake in the outcome to gut check the timeline.
And why is no stake so important?
Because they don't care if the project succeeds or fails. They aren't emotionally invested in the best-case scenario. They aren't worried about looking like a hero. They naturally take the outside view. They look at your plan and say, wait, you really think legal is going to approve this in 24 hours? They've literally never done that before.
They are the reality check. They spot the white-space risks that you are blind to because you're staring too hard at the prize.
Exactly. And because they're an outsider, they can say the uncomfortable truths that your own team might be afraid to voice.
Okay, so we have reference classes and skeptics. Strategy 3 is about buffers. Now, most people add buffers. I'll add 10% just in case. But Römer says that's the wrong way to do it.
Right. A vague buffer like add 10% for luck is weak. It just gets eaten up by Parkinson's law, work expands to fill the time available, or worse, a boss looks at it and says, why is there 10% padding? Cut it. We need to be lean.
So how do you defend the buffer?
You make it explicit contingency. The article suggests adding 15 to 25% contingency, but specifically for volatile items. And you name the risk. You don't say buffer. You say risk contingency for vendor API integration delay.
That is a crucial distinction. If I say buffer, it sounds like I'm being lazy. If I say risk contingency for API delay and the boss wants to cut it, I can say, okay, we can cut that time, but are we willing to accept the risk that the API fails and we miss the launch date?
Exactly. It forces a conversation about risk, not just about dates. It shifts the burden of the decision to the leadership. If they cut the buffer, they own the risk.
And strategy 4 deals with the execution side, task segmentation and implementation intentions. Breaking things down seems pretty standard Agile 101. But what is an implementation intention?
This comes from psychology. It's about closing the gap between intending to do something and actually doing it. We lose a lot of time in procrastination and decision fatigue. And implementation intention is basically an if-then plan.
Give me an example.
So instead of writing review code on your to-do list, you write, if it is 9 a.m. on Tuesday, then I will sit at my desk and start the code review. You set a specific trigger.
You're automating your willpower.
You are removing the decision. You don't have to decide to start. The clock decides for you. It reduces the friction of starting, which is where a lot of that white space time actually disappears, just scrolling, getting coffee, delaying the start.
I want to move to section 4 of our deep dive because the article includes a really meaty, real-world case study that brings all of this together. It's not a software launch. It's a business process transition. And it's a perfect example of how the world just interferes with our neat little plans.
This case study is fascinating. So the scenario. A company was moving a business process about 2,000 kilometers away to a new location. The plan relied heavily on employees traveling back and forth to train the new team.
On paper, that's straightforward. Book flights, go there, train, come back. Copy and paste the knowledge.
On paper, yes. But then a black swan event hit. Or maybe just a gray swan, an airport workers' strike.
Something totally out of their control.
Completely. The strike cut flights drastically. The article states that only about 40% of the staff could actually travel. The other 60% were grounded.
And because they were relying entirely on the happy path of easy travel, the project just imploded.
It was massive. Negotiations dragged on for 8 weeks, the transition slipped by a full month, and the financial hit. Profits dropped roughly 15% due to the downtime and all the extra costs of trying to fix the mess on the fly.
A 15% profit drop just because they didn't have a plan B for travel. That is the cost of the planning fallacy right there.
And the lesson here isn't don't travel. The lesson is about scenario planning. They treated travel as a certainty, not a dependency.
So how should they have handled it? If you were the unbiased skeptic in that room, what would you have asked?
I would have asked, what happens if we can't fly? You need response triggers. A response trigger says if travel capacity drops below 50%, we immediately pivot to plan B.
And plan B could be remote training, video modules, Zoom calls.
Exactly, but here's the key. You don't improvise plan B during the crisis. You have the decision made beforehand. That is what Felix Römer means by organizational rigor. When the strike hits, you don't panic. You just flip the switch.
That connects to the idea of a single source of truth, doesn't it?
Yes. You need a cadence weekly reviews, monthly retros, and you need plan management software where everyone sees the same risks. But more importantly, you need to change the mindset. You need to treat timelines as hypotheses, not promises.
I love that framing. A timeline is a hypothesis.
It is. It's a theory about how the future will unfold. And like any good scientific theory, you need to test it with data. If the data changes, like an airline strike, you update the hypothesis. You don't just scream at reality for not matching your plan.
That shifts the whole culture from I must not fail to I must learn and adapt.
And that is how you build a reliable organization.
So bringing this all home, we started with the inside view, that warm, fuzzy feeling that this time everything will go perfectly. We learned that this is actually a biological trap.
We saw how it creates white space risk, where we forget the permits and the friction, leading to these massive overruns like the Elbphilharmonie.
But we can fight back. We can use reference class forecasting, looking at the past, to predict the future. We can use unbiased skeptics to pop our optimism bubble, and we can build honest buffers, explicit contingencies that account for Murphy's Law.
And ultimately, I want to be really clear about the goal here. The goal isn't to be a pessimist. The goal isn't to be the person in the meeting saying, we can't do it. The goal is to be reliable.
Reliability builds trust. Optimism that misses the deadline, that destroys trust.
Precisely. If you tell me it will take 6 weeks and it takes 6 weeks, I trust you. If you tell me 3 weeks and it takes 6, I don't trust you, and I can't plan the rest of the business around you.
Reliability is the ultimate currency in business.
It really is.
So here is our final provocative thought for you today. We want to challenge you to do something practical right now. Audit one upcoming plan you have. Just one. It could be a work sprint, a marketing launch, or even that kitchen renovation.
And apply the outside view. Ignore what you hope will happen. Ignore your detailed list of steps. Ask yourself one question. What happened the last time I or anyone else tried to do something like this?
Be honest with that answer. If the data says 6 weeks and your plan says 3 weeks, you don't have a plan, you have a wish.
And start a learning loop. Start a simple log. Write down your predicted duration and then write down the actual duration. Just seeing that gap on paper will sharpen your instincts over time. It calibrates your internal clock.
It's painful at first, but it's really the only way to get better. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the planning fallacy. I hope you're walking away with a little less optimism, but a lot more confidence in your ability to actually deliver.
Better to be pleasantly surprised by finishing early than stressed out by finishing late.
100%. Thank you so much for tuning into the SmartKeys podcast. If you found this useful, if it saved you from a future deadline disaster, please subscribe. We are constantly exploring the future of work, efficiency, and the tools you need to stay ahead.
And do yourself a favor and read Felix Römer's full article, The Planning Fallacy. It has some great visual diagrams and a really detailed breakdown of that travel case study we mentioned.
You can find the link right there in the show notes. Go check it out. Until next time, keep planning, but keep it real.
See you next time.